Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about a very important concept in the world history, that is imperialism. So we are going to discuss about what is imperialism, what are the examples that we have seen in the past as well as in the recent times, and what are the differences, the major differences that makes imperialism different from the colonialism. That is something also we are going to discuss in this particular video. So first of all, if you want to define what does imperialism basically means, imperialism has been derived from two different terms. One is empire and other is ism. That means in simple term we can say imperialism can be referred as a process of empire building. And this is a practice that nations have forcefully imposed, especially in the past, in the 18th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century, when they try to impose their authority over other nations. This can be the example of imperialism. Typically, if we talk about it, involve the unprovoked use of military prowess, and it has been historically viewed in a negative connotation, a negative term, and currently it is considered as morally unacceptable practice as far as the foreign policy of any particular country is concerned. And since the imperialism has been discovered or has been categorized as a morally unacceptable principle, morally unacceptable policies, the accusation of imperialism, whether it is factual or not, have often been used in the propaganda as well, where some country is trying to denounce other countries or other nations' foreign policy. So this is overall introduction as far as the concept of imperialism is concerned. Now we go back in the history. Imperialism is something that has been in the history of humanity since there was tribes, tribal kingdoms, and in the most ancient times, we can understand it has evolved since the struggle between prehistoric clans for scarce food and resources, but still it has retained its bloody roots. And it is due to this reason many cultures across the world, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in India, or even in the Eastern Asia, they have suffered under the domination of the imperialist conquerors, which can be from different countries. Then, somewhere between 6th to 4th BC, that means in the ancient world, we can say the most important example of imperialist empire we can see was Assyrian Empire. Assyrian Empire gradually then degraded, and it was then followed by more liberal, we can say, Persian Empire that originated in the modern day Iran. Finally, the Persian Empire was also defeated by the Greek Empire, and especially under the leadership of Alexander the Great, he was able to do conquest across a large part of the world, and especially from the Eastern Europe, Eastern Mediterranean to the Western Asia, and he was able to reach even up to India at the bank of River Indus and Jhelum. However, his vision of seeing the world as a cosmopolis where everyone will live in a united way, everyone will live in a united fashion, remained a dream until it was partially realized when the Romans built their empire from Britain to Egypt. So the Alexander's dream was finally came into fruition after the Roman conquest and the Roman Empire, or at the pinnacle of the Roman Empire. After that, when the Roman Empire fell for a very long period of time, especially since 476 BC, the idea of imperialism as a force for unification faded quickly. And thus, after that, there is a strong, we can say, big brief is there before another wave of imperialism has hit the world. And this new wave of imperialism can further be divided into three different periods, which was followed by not only imperialism but also aggressive colonialism, mainly by the European powers, and that is something we are going to discuss in the later part of the video. So first of all, as we have discussed, after the fall of Roman Empire, when we come to the 15th century, we have the first wave of imperialism that we see, which historians also refer as Old Imperialism. This was the imperialism which was largely followed by the countries mainly from Europe, countries such as England, Spain, France, Portugal, as well as Holland, which is called as Netherlands these days. The basis of old imperialism basically was on the exploration that was carried out by a lot of merchants and traders and sailors, and from this world they were trying to seek the new world. They were trying to know the new or discover the new trade routes to the far east as well as far east, and most of the time when they were seeking these trade routes, they also come and clash with the inhabitant population of different places, and often there is a practice of establishing their own settlement in the violent manner. And it was this old imperialism which was guided by the principles of glory, God, and gold. So the basis of this old imperialism was glory, God, and gold, where glory refers to we can say valiance, God refers to the religion, and gold refers to the seek and thrust of having economic resources or control over the large economic resources across different parts of the world. And it is at the end of this old imperialism, somewhere in the 17th century and the beginning of 18th century, the Great Britain, out of all these powers we have discussed, European powers we have discussed, Great Britain had become the dominant colonial power with territorial holdings that spread all the way from India, South Africa to Australia. And it's during this time we have this dictum of that the sun never sets over the British Empire came into use. Then after the 17th century, again we have a small gap in the second wave of imperialism, and then between 1870 to World War I we have second wave of imperialism that is observed across the world, which is called as new imperialism. Now new imperialism is something that was largely driven by economic factors. For example, in most of the countries which were at that time following the principles of capitalism, they had overproduction and underconsumption problem. And largely it was a problem that has came into existence after industrial revolution and the successes of industrial revolution in the European countries. So due to the problem of overproduction and underconsumption, many European powers wanted to expand their market, wanted to expand their territorial bases, and thus an aggressive plan of empire building began in this particular era. Thus, the control over the local colonial government for their own benefit became the dictum of the colonial powers. And not only it was the economic regions, but since they have to assert their economic influence, they generally followed economic influence with the political annexation as well as overwhelming military force where there was any kind of opposition to their this particular goal. And this is something that we can clearly see in India, where British had followed the policy of divide and rule policy of subsidiary alliance and several other policies that has been followed mainly to have a full control over the economic resources and for that the political offices of India. So it is during this time we can also say that since Britain was continuously expanding its territory, expanding its colony, the sun never sets on British Empire also has come into existence during this particular time. Then again, after the defeat of France, so after the defeat of Germany in the World War One, the period leading up to World War Two again saw a small brief was there between the second and third wave of imperialism. And the third wave of imperialism we can see just before World War Two began, and this was largely driven by three countries, that is Germany and Italy in Europe and Japan in the Asia. And the main reason behind this third wave of imperialism was that these countries wanted to expand their nations' sphere of influence around the world. And however, this desire of these countries came at a huge expense because when the World War II began, there was a tremendous human and economic costs associated with this. So this was the end of the three waves of imperialism that we have seen. After that, imperialism we can say was considered as a very problematic policy, or was largely discarded in most of the countries, and no country after this Second World War II has been directly involved in imperialistic tendencies. Now, there are many theories which justifies the prevalence of imperialism. The most important and dominant theory is economic theory. And as far as the economic theory is concerned, many historians believe that imperialism was just a method by which the countries and nations were trying to maintain their already successful economy and a stable world order. And to do so, they require new markets, and these markets which can function on the whims and fancies of these emperors or empires. That is why they wanted actually new captive market, and it is in this captive market they used to export their highly and costly goods, and also it was helpful in sustaining their employment rate at the and their own territory. Not only that, they were also able to get a very cheaper raw material from a lot of their colonies that also helped in a continuous industrial development and industrialization of these countries and this economy. Not only that, some of the liberal economic theorists believe that it was a method to reduce the expenses of any particular country. At the same time, they are increasing their profit and balancing the production and consumption in the domestic market. So this is the economic theory, both conservative as well as liberal economic theory, that try to explain that how imperialism and why imperialism was can be justified. The other method of justification of imperialism, other theory, something that we can refer as a political theory. The historians who basically believe in political theory of imperialism, they say that imperialism was an inevitable result. That is something that could not have been stopped. and it was a inevitable result of the attempt of wealthy nations to maintain their positions in the world's balance of power. It has nothing to do with the economic control or economic resources. It has nothing to do with the overproduction and underconsumption. Rather, it was employed as a tool of foreign policy so that the stronger nations can remain stronger. Stronger nations are able to maintain the balance of power however they deem fit in the world. At the same time, it actually, the main purpose of imperialism was thus to minimize the nation's military and political vulnerability, and that is what the Great Britain and other imperial powers were trying to do in this particular time. The third and very interesting theory is something that is referred as warrior class theory. The people who believe in warrior class theory of imperialism, they simply say that imperialism is nothing but a pointless manifestation of the age-old behavior of nations whose political process have become dominated by warrior class. Here, warrior class refer to such category of people who have been continuously engaged in warfare, who has a career in military, and that is why they believe that it is their natural disposition to go and fight different wars and have control over as much territory as possible, and thus to satisfy an actual need for national defense. Many times there is no threat to national defense, but even if there is no threat to national defense, these people who belong to warrior class, they eventually try to manufacture crisis at the home, and they try to then portray the solution that the only solution for this crisis that has happened in our country is that we have to go and conquer other country, go and fight, go and attack other nations, other territories, and that is the where imperialism can be, or the origin or source of imperialism can be traced back to. So these are the three theories that explain or justifies the imperialism: the economic theory, the political theory, and finally the warrior class theory. Now, the last point which we can discuss, that many times we have two terms that keep coming that we come across when we are reading the history. One is the term that is called as colonialism, and other is the imperialism. So many times both seems very similar to each other, but there are some stark, strong differences between colonialism and imperialism. So first of all, if we compare the first point, what we can see or how can we define colonialism? It can be in simple term defined as a physical practice of global expansion. So what you can say, that colonialism is something that is an event, that is a phenomena, but the idea that drives this phenomena, the idea that drives this practice of colonialism is something that can be referred as imperialism. So imperialism in that manner can be called as a cause, while the colonialism is an effect of imperialism. So there is a causal relationship that exists between colonialism and imperialism. Imperialism is idea, and colonialism we can say is the manifestation of that particular idea. The third difference we can understand is that colonialism, which basically when any country is engaged in colonialism, they try to relocate some of its people to a new territory, and they try to settle these people as a permanent settlers in these new territories. And the basic objective of settling the country's population in new territories, so that they are able to harness the new territories resources, and thus they are able to gain economic opportunities, economic benefit. Also, keep in mind that these people who are relocating to new territories, though they are living in different country, though they are living in different land, still their allegiance is to the home country. So this is something that is taken advantage of by imperial power. On the other hand, if we try to understand imperialism, it is not only settlement of people in different countries for having access to economic resources or for economic profit and benefit. Rather, it is imposition of political and economic control over a conquered nation or nations through the use of military force if necessary. To give you an example of India, when East India came into India and started trading in India, this was an example of colonialism, because it started to settle a lot of people from England, and they were mainly engaged in trading activity, business activities. Later on, when the control of East India Company was taken over by the Crown, British Crown, that is something we can refer as the beginning of the era of imperialism, because that time the British power or British government used the military force and were able to use any kind of political and economic resources so that their control over the Indian territory can be maintained. Third, we can say that there is a lot of countries where we have seen colonization, especially in Asian countries, African countries. Even Spain has colonized a lot of South American countries, Latin American countries, and it is due to the colonization. And later on, when the colonization was being replaced by imperialism, we see a era of revolution and the independence movement that started to gather steam in these particular countries. And then finally, by the end of World War II, and after a few years succeeding to World War II, a lot of countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America started to get independent, and India being one of them. So what we can say in conclusion, that aside from the United States, talk about especially the contemporary time, aside from US, there is other prosperous nations which are continuously employing modern and occasionally traditional imperialism in the hopes of expanding their sphere of influence. This is something that we can clearly see during the era of Cold War, when the two superpowers that emerged after the end of World War II, Soviet Union and the United States of America, they were continuously tussling with each other and were trying to increase their sphere of influence. And that is why the proxy war has been fought in several countries such as Vietnam, we have Korean War, and we also have war in some of the South American countries such as Cuba. Thus, using a combination of hyper-aggressive foreign policy and limited military intervention in the modern times, countries like Russia, China, and most of the time US also have sought to spread their global influence. For example, in Iraq War, Afghanistan War, this is also many times considered by political scientists as a new form or new type of imperialism. Thus, in addition, not only even bigger countries today, but even smaller countries such as Iran and North Korea, they also are trying to aggressively build up their military capabilities, and they also are building up capabilities in the nuclear weapon sense, or trying to build up capabilities in nuclear weapon direction, so that they can gain an economic and strategic advantage in the area where they are situated. So this is something we can call as far as the modern time, the imperialism is concerned, it has emerged in a new form, very different from what we have seen in the 15th to beginning of the 19th century or beginning of 20th century. So that is all about this particular topic. I hope you understood about the concept of imperialism. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share it with your fellow aspirants, as well as subscribe to our channel for more helpful content. Thank you very much.